What would you do if the man you sacrificed your life for betrayed you in the cruelest way? Nina saved her husband, Michael, from a tragic accident, only to be abandoned and left for dead. But fate had other plans. Now reborn, she's ready to take back what was hers and make him pay for every tear she shed. Stay tuned for a story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate redemption. When the accident happened, I did everything I could to push my husband, Michael, out of the way of the car. As for me, I ended up being hit and left in a vegetative state. The driver responsible for the accident turned out to be the white moonlight, Violet, whom my husband secretly admired for so long. At the court, Michael forgave her without hesitation and later went to the hospital to pull the plug on me. After my death, he showed no sadness, marrying her immediately and having a child with her. But now, I've been reborn. Back to the day of the accident. This time, I will not save him. In my previous life, after I died, Michael knelt in front of my grave, crying bitterly. I naively thought he felt guilty, but he confessed instead, "Thank you for taking the accident for me, so my life could get back on track and return to my true love." Floating above, my soul seethed with resentment. I wished I could reach down and strangle him. To my disbelief, I opened my eyes and found myself back to that fateful day. "Nina, hurry up. The movie's about to start," Michael called impatiently. For a few seconds, my mind went blank. Then it hit me. I had been reborn on the day I got hit by that car and became a vegetable. But this time, I won't push him away. This time, I want to see Michael, the choreographer, get hit by Violet, his so-called white moonlight, let him break his leg, live as a cripple, and experience a fate worse than death. At this moment, Michael stood in the light, his charming eyes gazing at me, with a smile at the corner of his mouth. Looking into those seemingly affectionate eyes, I had once believed his love for me was sincere. It wasn't until the events of my previous life unfolded that I discovered just how cold-hearted he could be. After orchestrating my downfall, he didn't stop at making me a scapegoat in court by claiming I had violated traffic safety laws. He even used his status as my family member to read a letter of clemency for the perpetrator, right there in court. The most unforgivable act came when he accompanied Violet, the driver responsible for the accident, to the hospital to remove my ventilator. All because Violet was his former girlfriend he could never let go of. In front of him, Violet acted guilt-ridden, crying so much that she lost weight, which easily melted Michael's heart. They got married soon after and used my money to buy a house. Reflecting on my past life, I find it ridiculous. When Michael's career hit rock bottom, it was Violet who abandoned him to pursue wealth abroad. Yet I stayed by his side, enduring hardship, until he became a moderately famous dance instructor. I remember vividly the time I bought myself an expensive lipstick as a birthday gift. Michael dismissed it as wasteful. Thinking back now, it wasn't about the price. It was that he didn't think I deserved it. I'll never forget the look on his face when he heard the price of that lipstick. Right there in front of the store clerk, his face darkened, and he muttered under his breath, "Such extravagance! How can one live like this?" Love, or the lack thereof, is so painfully obvious. If a man is unwilling to spend money on you, no excuse can hide the fact that he doesn't love you. "Nina, what are you spacing out for? Hurry up!" Michael's impatient voice broke my thoughts. I ignored him and looked around. That's when I saw it. A white bus barreling down the road at an alarming speed. I couldn't help but smirk. Here comes the vehicle that turned me into a vegetative state and eventually killed me. But this time, I made a different choice. I wouldn't run up and push Michael out of harm's way. "Nina, what are you doing? Move!" Michael yelled again, his voice laced with irritation. Before he could finish, the bus hit him. The impact threw him to the ground, and the sound of bones cracking echoed in the air. This time, Michael was the one who got hit. The bus mercilessly crushed his legs. The sharp sound of bones shattering, crack, crack, echoed in my ears. For the first time I found the noise strangely satisfying. In my previous life, Michael, didn't you cry at my grave, thanking me for setting your life back on its rightful path and reuniting you with your true love? This life, I'll be kind enough to send you off in the opposite direction. Let's see if your so-called true love will stay by your side when you're left crippled. Michael's injuries were worse than I anticipated. The emergency doctor informed me that the only way to save his life was to amputate his legs. It reminded me of how, in my previous life, Michael had coldly signed the papers to pull my ventilator. This time, I had no hesitation, as I signed the consent form for his surgery. After I handed over the papers, I gripped the doctor's hand, beaming. "Cut them off, doctor. Cut them off from the thigh. If that's not enough, go higher. Just make sure you save him." Over the years, Michael had built some fame in the world of traditional dance. Starting young, he'd won numerous awards, earning admiration within the industry. Everyone saw him as a rising star, destined to become one of the country's leading dancers. Even Michael believed that his legs were his most valuable asset, going so far as to use the face masks I bought for myself to pamper them. But now, the very legs he cherished so much were gone. From this moment, Michael Ma, the future dance prodigy, would never step onto a stage again. The thought of his despair brought a twisted sense of satisfaction. 2 days later, Michael regained consciousness. The moment he opened his eyes, he instinctively tried to sit up, but quickly realized he couldn't feel his legs. When I explained the amputation, his eyes turned red, his hands trembling as they reached out aimlessly. I stood by his bedside, watching his face crumble in despair. "How could this happen to me?" he murmured, tears streaking down his cheeks. "Oh, Michael," I replied, my voice soft and brimming with feigned sorrow. "It was such a close call. I was so scared. I wish I could have done something to save your legs." Though my words sounded tearful, my heart was anything but. From that day, Michael's mood became increasingly volatile. He refused to speak, eat, or meet anyone other than me. Every time he was dissatisfied, he'd throw whatever was within his reach. I, playing the role of the devoted wife, stayed by his side, catering to his every need. One evening, I made his favorite dish, dong po pork. The burns on my hands from cooking brought tears to his eyes. "Nina, why were you so careless? Does it hurt?" "Not at all," I answered with a gentle smile. "As long as you enjoy the meal, it's worth it." He seemed deeply moved and devoured the meal. But beneath my nurturing facade, I was only biding my time. Despite my disgust, I had to keep up appearances as the perfect wife. I stayed by Michael's side, pretending to care, while secretly planning my next moves. Our marriage wasn't just a relationship. It was tied to our shared business, a media company I had solely invested in when it started. All of Michael's commercial performances and the connections he had in the industry were due to my efforts. Even the famous peacock dance he was known for had been choreographed by a retired master I had painstakingly convinced to come back to work. Now that Michael was incapacitated, I used this opportunity to reclaim control of the company. I returned under the pretense that the company needed someone to manage daily operations while Michael recovered. At first, it was easy to resume my role. Most of the artists and clients had been dealing with me all along, so transitioning power back to me didn't seem unusual. But to solidify my influence, I needed to make a statement, something that would ensure everyone's loyalty to me. As fate would have it, an opportunity presented itself. One day, while discussing the company's development with Michael, the hospital room door swung open. A familiar figure stormed in, Violet. The sight of her made my lips curl into a cold smile. She didn't even glance at me as she rushed to Michael's side, throwing herself into his arms. "Michael, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please don't press charges," she sobbed, her tears falling freely. Michael, stunned by her sudden appearance, instinctively comforted her. "Violet, don't cry, please." "Excuse me," I said sharply, breaking their emotional exchange. Startled, Michael pushed Violet away, stammering, Nina, it's not what it looks like. I accidentally called her that. I didn't mean to. Of course, I knew better. In our past lives, Michael had married Violet after my death. He was so enamored with her that he couldn't even hide his feelings now, despite our marriage. Feigning ignorance, I played along, smiling politely at Violet. Violet, it's good to see you. What brings you here today? Michael, please don't sue me. I'll do anything to make it right, she pleaded, completely ignoring me. Before Michael could respond, I interjected. If Violet truly wants to make amends, then it's simple. Compensation. $250,000 will suffice. Violet's face went pale. $250,000? That's impossible. I don't have that kind of money. You can pay in installments, I said sweetly. But if you're unable to commit, we'll settle this in court. Her body trembled, and she looked to Michael for help. Michael, please, I can't afford this. I have my sick mother to care for. Please tell her to stop. Seeing her distressed state, Michael turned to me, his voice harsh. Nina, how could you be so heartless? Violet doesn't have the money. Just drop the case. Oh? I sneered, my patience thinning. You want to defend the woman who ruined your legs while reprimanding your wife for seeking justice. How noble of you. For a moment the room fell silent. Violet turned to me, her eyes glistening with desperation. How much would you lower the amount if I pay all at once? She whispered, barely audible. I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. Oh, so you do have some money. In that case, I might be persuaded to settle for $200,000. Violet bit her lip, her body trembling. That's still too much. Can't you lower it further? I could pay $10,000 now, and the rest in small payments over time. Hearing her audacity, I couldn't suppress a cold laugh. $10,000. At that rate, it would take you decades to pay me off. Are you serious, Violet? If you're really struggling, then let's meet in court. Her face turned ashen. She turned back to Michael, her last lifeline. Michael, please, she cried, clutching his hands. You know my situation. You know I didn't mean to hurt you. Can't you convince Nina to be reasonable? Michael, torn between his feelings for Violet and the reality of the situation, looked at me with pleading eyes. Nina, don't you think this is going too far? Violet didn't mean to cause the accident. She's been through enough. Enough? I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my composure. The hypocrisy in his words made my blood boil. She's been through enough, I repeated, my voice laced with venom. And what about me, Michael? Have I been through enough? She ruined your life, yet you defend her. You want me to drop the charges and forgive her, as if nothing happened. Before he could respond, I continued, my tone rising with each word. If she doesn't want to pay, then let her face the consequences in court. I'm done with this discussion. Without waiting for a reply, I turned and left the room, my heart pounding with rage. Later that evening, as I sat in my study reviewing documents, a knock on the door interrupted me. It was Michael, wheeling himself into the room. Nina, we need to talk, he began, his voice softer than usual. I closed my laptop and folded my hands, waiting for him to continue. I know you're angry, he said, avoiding my gaze, but holding on to this grudge won't help anyone. Violet, she's not as bad as you think. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. Not as bad as I think? Michael, have you forgotten everything she's done? Or are you just too blinded by your feelings for her to see the truth? His face flushed with embarrassment, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he said, I'm asking you to let this go. For me. For you? I repeated, my voice cold. You mean the same way you let me go in our previous life, Michael. The way you and Violet walked into that hospital room and pulled the plug on me without a second thought. His eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, he was speechless. How do you know about that? He stammered. Leaning forward, I met his gaze with unwavering intensity. Because, Michael, I remember everything. This isn't just a second chance for you. It's mine too. And I won't waste it on someone who never truly cared for me. Michael's face turned pale, and his hands trembled as he gripped the arms of his wheelchair. He stared at me as though seeing a ghost. You remember, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Yes, Michael, I remember it all. The accident, the trial, the hospital, and how you stood by Violet, sacrificing me without hesitation. He shook his head violently, his face contorted with panic. No, Nina, it wasn't like that. I didn't have a choice. A choice? I let out a cold laugh. There's always a choice, Michael. You chose her. Not just once, but over and over again. Even in this life, you're still making the same choice. Do you really think I'd let history repeat itself? His mouth opened and closed, as if searching for words, but nothing came out. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He began, but I cut him off. Save it, Michael. I'm done listening to your excuses. From now on, I'll do what I should have done long ago. Take control of my life and leave you to deal with the mess you've created. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into work, taking over the company completely, while Michael remained confined to his wheelchair at home. The staff quickly rallied behind me, impressed by my leadership and determination. But not everything was smooth sailing. Violet, true to her manipulative nature, began making moves behind the scenes. She spread rumors, played the victim, and even tried to approach Michael again, seeking his support. It was laughable how predictable she was. I kept my cool, knowing her antics would only dig her grave deeper. One evening, while reviewing contracts at the office, Daniel knocked on my door. Nina, can I come in? He asked, peeking his head through the doorway. Of course, Daniel, I said, motioning for him to enter. He stepped inside, holding a folder. I found something interesting about Violet. I thought you'd want to see this. Curious, I gestured for him to hand it over. Inside the folder were documents and photographs exposing Violet's shady dealings. She had been embezzling money, forging documents, and using underhanded tactics to sabotage her rivals. Well, I said with a smirk, closing the folder. Looks like Violet has been busy. What do you want to do about it? Daniel asked, his tone serious. I met his gaze, my resolve unshakable. Expose her. It's time the world sees her for who she really is. The fallout was swift and brutal. When the evidence against Violet went public, her carefully constructed facade crumbled, clients distanced themselves, and her reputation was left in ruins. As for Michael, he tried to defend her at first, but the overwhelming proof made even him doubt her. Watching his once unwavering loyalty waver brought me a twisted sense of satisfaction. One night, as I returned home from work, I found Michael waiting for me in the living room. Nina, he said, his voice filled with desperation. I made a mistake. I should have believed in you from the beginning. Please, let's start over. I stared at him, my expression cold and unyielding. Start over, Michael. There's nothing left to start. You chose Violet over me, and now you're paying the price. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Goodbye, Michael. This is where our story ends. Michael sat there motionless, his hand still hovering in the air where mine had been. The reality of my words seemed to sink in, and his shoulders slumped in defeat. For a moment I felt a flicker of pity, but I quickly brushed it aside. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with the consequences. I left the house without looking back, my resolve unshaken. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. In the months that followed, I poured all my energy into the company. With Daniel's support, we expanded into new markets and signed deals with rising stars who brought fresh energy to our brand. The company flourished, and so did my confidence. Meanwhile, Michael's life took a sharp turn for the worse. Without his legs, he struggled to find purpose. The pity he once garnered from others began to fade, replaced by whispers of disdain. His association with Violet had tarnished his reputation, and his former colleagues distanced themselves from him. As for Violet, her downfall was even more spectacular. The scandals we exposed not only ruined her career, but also left her financially ruined. She tried to latch on to wealthy men to regain her footing, but her tarnished image made her an outcast. One evening, while attending a networking gala, I overheard whispers about Violet. "Did you hear? She's working as a waitress at some dive bar now," one woman said, her tone dripping with schadenfreude. "Serves her right," another chimed in. "She used to act like she was better than everyone else. Look where that got her." Their words didn't stir any satisfaction in me. Violet's downfall had been inevitable, but it no longer mattered. I had moved past it. A year later, as I stood in my office overlooking the city skyline, Daniel walked in with a stack of documents. "These are the final contracts for the expansion," he said, placing them on my desk. I glanced at him, a smile tugging at my lips. "You've been working hard, Daniel. You've earned a break." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Not until you do. You've been going non-stop for months. Don't you think it's time to take a breather?" I leaned back in my chair, considering his words. It was true. I had been so focused on rebuilding my life and the company that I hadn't stopped to enjoy the fruits of my labor. "You're right," I admitted. "Maybe it's time to take a step back and see what life has to offer beyond work." "Good," he said with a grin. "Because there's a new restaurant downtown I've been meaning to try, and I'd love for you to join me." I raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by his invitation. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something I hadn't noticed before: genuine warmth and sincerity. "All right," I said, smiling. "Let's go." That evening, as I sat across from Daniel at a cozy restaurant, I realized something profound. My past, filled with betrayal and pain, no longer held power over me. I had reclaimed my life, rebuilt my confidence, and found someone who valued me for who I truly was. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to shape. As the weeks turned into months, my life began to feel like my own again. The company thrived, and with Daniel's unwavering support, we had secured our position as one of the leading media firms in the industry. Michael and Violet, on the other hand, seemed to vanish from the public eye. Occasionally, I would hear whispers about their struggles. Michael living alone in a small apartment, relying on government support, while Violet bounced from one low-paying job to another. Their misery no longer brought me joy or satisfaction. Instead, I felt a quiet detachment, as though they were characters in a story I had long since closed. One afternoon, while preparing for a major contract signing, my assistant entered the room, looking hesitant. "Ms. Nina, there's someone here to see you," she said softly. "Who is it?" I asked, not looking up from the documents in front of me. "It's Michael," she replied. The pen in my hand stilled. I hadn't seen Michael since the day I walked out of that house. Part of me was curious about what had brought him here, but another part wanted to send him away without a second thought. "Send him in," I said, my voice steady. Moments later, Michael wheeled himself into my office. He looked older, worn down by life's hardships. His once vibrant eyes were dull, and his shoulders sagged as though the weight of the world rested on them. "Nina," he began, his voice hoarse, "thank you for agreeing to see me." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. "What do you want, Michael?" He hesitated, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair. "I came to apologize for everything. For what I did to you in the past, for the way I treated you, and for the choices I made." I studied him for a moment, searching for any signs of insincerity. But all I saw was a broken man, humbled by his mistakes. "I don't need your apology, Michael," I said finally. "What's done is done. I've moved on." "I know," he said quickly. "I can see that. You're doing so well, and I'm happy for you. But I needed to say it. I needed to tell you how much I regret everything." Silence filled the room. As his words hung in the air, I let out a slow breath, feeling a strange sense of closure. "I appreciate you saying that," I said softly. "But it doesn't change the past. We've both moved on, And that's how it should stay. Michael nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I wish you nothing but happiness, Nina. With that, he turned and wheeled himself out of my office, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That evening, I met Daniel for dinner. As we talked and laughed, I realized how much my life had changed. I had found someone who truly valued me, who stood by my side no matter what. As the night wore on, I looked into his eyes and saw a future filled with hope and possibility. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the shadows of my past, free to love and be loved, and free to live a life that was truly my own. Months passed, and life continued to bloom. With new opportunities and happiness, the company expanded internationally, and my reputation as a leader in the industry soared. Daniel became more than just a business partner. He was my rock, my confidant, and the person who reminded me of my worth every single day. One evening, as we were walking along a quiet park path, he stopped suddenly. Nina, he said, turning to face me. The golden hues of the setting sun framed his face, and I noticed an unusual nervousness in his eyes. What is it, Daniel? I asked, my heart fluttering. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath hitched as he knelt on one knee, opening the box to reveal a stunning ring. I've watched you rebuild your life with grace and strength. I've seen you rise above every challenge and turn pain into power. Nina, I love you for the incredible person you are, and I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. Will you marry me? Tears welled in my eyes as I looked at the man who had stood by me through it all. For the first time, I felt truly understood, valued, and cherished. Yes, Daniel, I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion. Yes, I will marry you. Our wedding was a simple yet beautiful affair, surrounded by close friends and colleagues who had supported me throughout my journey. As I walked down the aisle, I felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. The man waiting for me at the end of the aisle wasn't just a partner, he was my fresh start, my future. Years later, I found myself sitting in my garden, watching the sunset with Daniel by my side. Our children played nearby, their laughter filling the air. Looking back, the pain and betrayal of my past felt like a distant memory. I had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to thrive, to rebuild, and to love. Life had come full circle, and I wouldn't change a thing. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales. Your support means the world to us.